Iran is no stranger to women martyrs. In 2019, Sahar Dayari dressed up as a man to sneak into a stadium and watch a men's soccer match. She was caught, arrested, and sentenced to 6 months in jail. She set herself on fire in protest and died, setting off outrage and protests in the country over the treatment of women and the strict consequences of breaking the law. Recently, protests have raged at the death of Mahsa Amini, a 22-year-old who died after being arrested by Iran's morality police for not wearing a hijab properly. The morality police enforce the country's rules on conservative Islamic behavior, namely how women dress and behave. She was arrested in her brother's car while visiting family. Though police claim she died of unrelated causes, she suffered multiple blows to the head, leading to a coma before she died. British Iranian actor Omid Djalali describes it as Iran's George Floyd moment, and to be quite honest, I don't disagree. Videos of the protests show powerful images of unrest. Male allies protecting women from burning their hijabs, while online, many have posted videos cutting their hair. I am not Muslim, and I do not claim to speak on the behalf of Muslim women regarding hijab. However, I do think that we as Westerners often remain silent on obvious examples of female oppression out of a fear of offending others, and out of a misplaced desire for tolerance. We are willing to overlook acts of misogyny and violence towards women because we see it as inherently being a part of other cultures. This view is known as moral relativism. Moral relativism is the view that moral judgments are true or false only relative to some particular standpoint, for instance, that of a culture or historical period, and that no standpoint is uniquely privileged over all others. One major criticism of moral relativism is that it implies that anything is permissible if it is societally approved. Slavery is just according to the norms of a slave society. Sexist practices are right according to the values of a sexist culture. In this way, we are able to write off the struggles of other women by saying that it is an intrinsic part of their culture, and that's simply not true. If we were to believe that, then no culture anywhere has room for growth. It says that the world we're in now is perfectly fine as is, and because it is culturally accepted to live like this, who's to say that this is not what morality looks like for us? This in itself is also racism, as by supporting the misogynistic treatment of women due to cultural or religious norms, it's as if they think women being oppressed is an innate part of their culture, and that women of color should endure misogyny because somehow it's more sacred to us. Meanwhile, lots of aspects of Western misogyny are also related to culture or religion, yet people don't justify it and excuse it. For example, a little girl was brought in as a child bride in Europe and accepted as such because it's a different culture, but that's just misogyny. It's not some deep cultural ritual that little girls are basically sold to men as wives young. It's taboo even in the countries where that is apparently our culture. The same can be said of Christian purity culture, wherein women are told that their only value lies in their remaining chaste for marriage, and in submitting to their husbands. All of it is misogyny, and regardless of what culture it stems from, it deserves to be criticized. This is not how it's meant to be. Women in Iran do not want to live this way. Many women have spoken out against the oppression of the hijab, and yet the West insists mindless acceptance is support of diversity. This is completely false. Survey results published in 2020 showed that 72% of Iranians, with the majority of those surveyed living in the country, were opposed to the compulsory covering. The West refuses to view anything that has been presented as a choice as being oppressive, and as a result of the lens of choice feminism, has aided in the silencing of the voices of women living under oppressive reigns. One can have this discussion without being Islamophobic or racist. While many argue that the hijab can be worn in a feminist and self-affirming way, I find those arguments to be, like much of those born of the postmodernist movement, overly wordy and ultimately arguing little. For example, in Is the Hijab Question a Feminist Question, an article on Hindu.com, one argument reads, to view veiling through the prism of patriarchal oppression and nothing else is to reduce the garment to its immediate meaning, discounting the heterogeneity of reasons why women don the hijab. To view the hijab as a contest between men and women, oppression and freedom, patriarchy and liberation, is to reduce hijab-wearing women to their immediate identities of victims of patriarchy, denying them their agency and therefore viewing the world through a narrow dichotomy. This argument attempts to suggest that there is a larger meaning behind the hijab, which should be considered above the immediate source of oppression it provides. It says that because women choose to wear, they are not victims of the patriarchy. But of course, this doesn't take into account that many women don't choose to wear it, and that those that do still face cultural pressure to do so, the same as women in the West face pressure to shave and conform to beauty standards. The Quran comes from a time in the 600s where slave women were uncovered, which made wearing the hijab similar to a form of status symbol. Free women wore specific clothing which identified them as not slave women. In other words, it provided a distinction between public property and private property. The Quran is a reflection of that, And the common argument, not only in the Quran but around Muslims to this day, is that women should wear the hijab so as not to be sexually harassed by men. While it is not often directly stated that if you don't wear the hijab then harassment is justified, that is a common belief. I would argue that it's equatable to how women in the West are encouraged to dress a certain way to avoid getting raped, and places the responsibility on the women to lessen the harassment instead of criticizing men for harassing women to begin with. The Quran itself doesn't mention the hijab at all. It specifically says to cover your breast and genitalia for women, but the assumption that the hijab should be worn comes from the basic argument that because a specific cloth commonly worn back then was mentioned, then that must be what women must wear. The jilbab is a cloth you put over your head and then wrap around yourself, which is where the argument that women must cover their hair and arms comes from. The Quran itself does not say that. What it does say is to cover your breast and genitals. In the words of the great Letitia Kai, modesty culture is popular in mainstream religions, but not only. In modesty culture, girls and women are expected to dress in such a way that boys and men will not be distracted by their clothing. If a boy or man lusts after a girl or woman, sexually harasses or assaults her, she shares the responsibility of the sin because of her clothing choice. While I have nothing against dressing modestly, I have a huge problem about the fact that it is women's responsibility to control men's sexual pulsions. Women don't dress for themselves or to be comfortable anymore. They always and only dress with men in mind. They're supposed to dress to protect men's ego and to help them not sin. Meanwhile, the protests have been responded to with an internet shutdown and violence against protesters. Gender-based violence against women, including so-called honor killings, continues in Iran, and the country's laws do little to protect them. As feminists, we owe it to our sisters to uplift their voices and to offer whatever support we can to their fight for basic human decency and freedom. This, dear viewers, is where we part. Please forgive me for any mispronunciations. Anyone who knows me knows that I, in general, have a difficult time enunciating unfamiliar words. I did try my best, and I was trying to cover this topic as respectfully as possible. So I asked Menalez from Tumblr, we had an interview previously on this channel, to go over some of what I wrote before I did recording for the script, just to make sure that I understood what I was talking about. Because I'll be the first to say that I'm not a religious person. The only understanding I have of religion is what was covered in classes that I've taken, which are usually an overview and don't, give you the full picture. If anyone would like to add on or correct, please reach out and contact me. This is obviously not my fight. This is not something that I can completely understand, but as a feminist, it is my duty to support other women in their fight for freedom, and I hope that you guys do as well. Additionally, I think it's very important to understand that you can support women who are fighting against oppression without being racist or Islamophobic. I have worked with and been friends with many Muslim men and women in my life, and they've all been very nice, wonderful people. And I don't think that you should judge someone on account of their religion or of their race or where they come from. It's just not a fair assessment of an individual, and people can act in ways that surprise you. Beyond that, if anyone leaves any racist comments, please be aware that they will be deleted. I don't delete comments often, but I don't support racism in any way, shape, or form. And I'm not going to support that in this video at all. If I find any charities to link to, I'll bring them in the description. And you guys know the drill. Like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.